front door. You have been walking past it for 700 years. What does it say?
Police telephone free for use of public.
There's an instruction at the bottom. What does it say?
Pull to open, because you do pull to open a police box.
Yes, and what do you do?
Picking up junk, examining it, breaking bits off, putting them into others.
What don't they know?
This time there's three of us.
And they get to argue over silly things.
What could possibly go wrong?
Here come the drums!
Hello and welcome to Pull to Open, an ongoing quest to watch every episode of Doctor Who in completely random order. I'm Pete Paschal.
And I'm Chris Taylor, and normally we're just a couple of guys, a couple of podcasters, a couple of journalists, a couple of Doctor Who fans. But now, what don't they know? This time there's three of us. We are joined by our very special guest, Mr. Dave Ketchen, all the way from the Doctor Who show. Dave, welcome to Pull to Open.
Cloud Grows Wild.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Fabulous.
Hey, this is awesome.
It's so exciting that you've joined us for this one. I'm so pleased that it's a good one. I don't know if you've been listening to the show recently. We've been through a spate of not so good episodes, although Pete and I disagreed on the most recent one. But Pete, do you want to catch up the fine folks at home about where we have been so far and what had recently hit us when we picked up Dave on our journey?
Sure. Previously on Pull to Open, 3 episodes ago, we were at the Peter Capaldi episode, ambitious episode called Kill the Moon. It wasn't necessarily the beginning of our run, but it is in the middle of it.
Oh, right in the middle.
Anyway, once the moon was exterminated, we rewound all the way back to the Hartnell era, the late Hartnell era, with the season 4 opener, The Smugglers, a completely lost episode, which actually has recently been announced it's going to be animated probably later this year. But we got in under the wire with some telesnaps and some audio.
That's right. We got to be smugglers hipsters.
And I thought you guys were a little bit harsh on the smugglers, I've got to admit. I don't think it's great, but I think it's a little bit better than you gave it credit for.
I was the one. You don't have to say us. Chris was actually okay with it. I was a little like, oh my God.
Yeah. I was like, but that was my reaction. And Pete was more, Yeah.
I'm a little closer to the. I think I'm younger than you, Chris. Am I? I forget. I don't know.
Yes, you are.
I'm just more used to things moving as I'm watching them. You know, me and the younger generation.
Whoa there.
The talkies and the.
You kids and your cinematography. I don't know. You don't know what it's like in the old day of picture books. Anyway,
from The Smugglers, we fast forwarded a little bit to the 4th Doctor era, and we landed back on Gallifrey for his second excursion to Gallifrey, where he actually becomes the president of Gallifrey in the Invasion of Time.
Yes, and that was one that Pete liked better than I did.
I like it. It's a Russian doll of alien invasions on the most powerful planet in the cosmos. I mean, just that alone.
Yeah, with hospital corridors thrown in for good measure. What's not to love?
Yeah, I've yet to hear. I was yet to hear your Invasion of Time episode, but I'm a fan. I think that it has its flaws, but it also has some really fun stuff.
Yeah,
it has its flaws, and many of those flaws are covered with tiny plastic chairs.
I like this with Dave having sides so that we bust the tie when we have a tie, Chris. So it's like,
wow.
Invasion of Time, we've overpowered you, and on The Smugglers, I've been in the corner.
You have been arrested, and you're about to call us gentlemen and try and get out of your pickle that way. But anyway, from the Invasion of Time...
All of that was leading up to Series 6, Episode 4, The Doctor's Wife.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so glad that for our guest we found a good episode, but also an episode with such obvious connection to the previous one in our random journey. It doesn't get more connected than running around TARDIS corridors and running around TARDIS corridors.
Yeah, exactly.
So
there
Dave,
could not be more stark difference between those corridors, I must say.
Indeed. So I'm curious, Dave. Had you watched The Doctor's Wife much before watching it for this podcast?
So I'll be honest. Watching it yesterday for the podcast is the first time I've watched it since broadcast.
Oh wow! Look at you!
Wow,
you've just got too much other Doctor Who to watch, I think, based on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before I go any further, should I be seeing waveforms under my name in this little boxy thing?
You probably should be seeing waveforms. Of course, he's referring to the Zencaster. I'm seeing them, Dave. So if you're not seeing them, don't you worry.
That's okay.
We're getting all your audio. It's all happening.
That's okay. I'd feel terrible doing an hour and not having asked the question, and it wasn't working.
No. Yes. I appreciate it. That's okay. And I appreciate the reality. I might not even edit this out.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post. It's fine.
We're gonna get to all the commentary on The Doctor's Wife. It's gonna be great. It's really cool to hear that you haven't seen it since broadcast, because that's like 12 years of difference.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of Doctor Who since. So that's gonna be an interesting perspective to bring on it. But I'd love to hear just a little bit more about you and the Doctor Who show, honestly, just for a few minutes here. So I got to say, I've been an admirer of you and your show, and Rob, and both of you do such a great job on that show for a while. And I really want to congratulate you guys recently on your episode on the Jodie Whittaker, the ultimate Jodie Whittaker cold take, where you guys went over the whole era and sort of picked out some winners and losers and controversial ones and just things that needed revisiting. Because it occurred to me as you were doing that episode, like, our whole thing here on Pull to Open is cold takes, right? That's just the gist of it. We don't even when Doctor Who is live on the air, we don't really do much in the way of hot takes. We do a little bit, right? Like when Flux was on the air, we did a little bit of back and forth. Certainly when The Power of the Doctor was broadcast, we did it. But I kind of wanted to ask you, like, in terms of hot takes, cold takes, do you see one being more valuable than the other? I feel like everything becomes kind of a cold take after a while, and ultimately ends up being like what fans and everyone thinks of certain episodes. But those hot takes, are they valuable at all? I mean, they sort of set a stake in the ground, I guess, on what people think of it. How do you think about that?
Yeah, look, thanks for the feedback. It's really nice to hear. And we have had really good feedback on that Jodie Whittaker cold take episode. It's been one of our best downloaded and best commented on episodes. So it seems to have resonated with a lot of people. And I think the hot takes are interesting because they are a measure of a piece of time. They're a measure of that instant reaction of, I've literally just watched this episode. I've turned the mic on. Do I feel happy? Do I feel angry? Do I feel sad? Do I feel indifferent? Do I feel bored? And you capture that instant sort of reaction straight away. But I think the more important thing is that I certainly started my fandom as a kid going along to the local Doctor Who club with my dad. You know, most dads want to take their kids to the footy or the cricket, and I was one of those kids that, like, okay, well, if we're going to do father-son stuff, it's going to be Doctor Who related. So, you know, he'd take me along to the club, and then I sort of got involved in my own right and ended up on the committee when I was a teenager, and life went from there. But that sort of Doctor Who fandom doesn't exist quite as much anymore. That idea of a local club where you go along once a month or whatever the case may be and you chat to other fans kind of died out. There are groups that still meet in different formats, but not nearly as much as back when I was a kid, sometime late last century.
Totally.
And
it's so great to hear you say it. Just to to interrupt, but just to be like, that idea, certainly back in the 80s and 90s when people were sort of meeting in these fandom groups, that's really how, it's not quite how I started, but once I got really enthusiastic about my fandom, I joined the local club. And this is in Edmonton, Canada. And I feel like Australia and Western Canada are a little similar in the sense, you've probably heard this before, in that we both got a whole lot of Doctor Who thrown at us through, I think in Australia through ABC, and in Western Canada through PBS, and sort of rebroadcast on Canadian cable that way. And it's created these little sort of colonies of Doctor Who fans
yes, very, very much so.
have now have 30 years later, continued with their fandom, and they're just, we're finding each other now through the internet and podcasts like ours. It's great.
And are so much more informed than the English fans, may I just say. I mean, because we didn't, of course, complained about this many times, would have loved to have been brought up in one of those colonies where you got Doctor Who all of the time, every day. It sounds like unimaginable utopia, or would have done to me as a child anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great as a Doctor Who fan to grow up in Australia because it was near constant repeats 4 or 5 days a week, every week. So it was pretty cool in that sense. But that sort of personal fandom has really moved away. And so the way that we engage now as fans is, I think, through some of those hot takes. So part of the enjoyment of a new episode is that it drops, you watch it, and then you get online and you have a chat about it, whether it's over a podcast or listening to a podcast or over other forums, whatever the case may be. That's really become the substitute for that personal fandom involvement. And I really enjoy that. So Rob and I get together, we say, this is what we thought. Did we enjoy it? Did we not enjoy it? What did we take out of it? What was the good? What was the bad? And then our listeners come back and they say whether they agree with us. I go and listen to a bunch of other podcasts to hear whether we were in tune with them or not in tune with them. And that's a really exciting sort of positive part of being a fan. But it's only a very small measure of what the episode was like. And we really found with the Jodie Whittaker era, because I think we all went into it with a lot of preconceptions, particularly coming off the back of the Moffat era, where we'd been trained to look for a whole lot of stuff in episodes. And then at the end, Chris Chibnall gave that infamous DW interview where he said, oh, no, there was none of that. None of it was planned. None of it was foreshadowed. I just made it up as I went along. And so you go, well, okay, maybe we were judging these episodes on a standard in which it wasn't meant to be judged. And going back when you just go, hey, he was just writing this stuff without any sort of arc or preconceptions or anything like that. So let's assess it as that is. And suddenly, instead of watching it going, what does this mean? You're just going, oh, that was cool. Mm-hmm. And it was a whole different approach to the era.
Yeah, it's funny. We haven't gone back to too much of Whittaker in this podcast, but we've done a few. And I would say in almost every instance, except Orphan 55, in almost every other instance, it's kind of improved. And honestly, for me, I know, Chris and I mean, we were pretty similar reviewed for Orphan 55, but even for me, Orphan 55 improved a little bit because I knew going in what it was going to be like. So
Rosa and the Witchfinders, the other two we've been to, and they improved massively on a second viewing.
Well, and Revolution of the Daleks too.
Yes. But that is sort of, Doctor Who does seem uniquely susceptible to this sort of hot take, cold take thing, right? A second viewing almost always changes your perspective on the story. At least I've found, and for the show, I think both of us have found that it invariably improves. Like I can count on one hand the number of times we've had our view of a story brought down by rewatching it. Right? There's always something else you can see. So it's uniquely susceptible to that. And you sort of, this is a thing with Whittaker that we always knew was coming, right? That there would always someday be a great reassessment of her stuff, as there has been with every previous Doctor.
Yeah, and I think particularly fans of our sort of generation are kind of genetically preconditioned to be worried the show's about to be cancelled at the end of every episode. And so we
very true.
Particularly I grew up, the era that I can most remember watching on first broadcast is the McCoy era. I have some very dim memories of late Davo and Colin, but I can remember properly as a primary school kid watching the McCoy era go out. And, it did feel like this could be cancelled at any point, and it was cancelled twice in the 80s. And I think that as fans, we do watch something, particularly something like the Jodie era, where it's been around for a while now, and we know that television stations do like change. And there is this feeling of, if this isn't perfect, it's going to be cancelled and we're going to lose the show again. And you watch it with that really hypercritical, hypersensitive view. Whereas now we know that the show not only was not cancelled, but it's going on to a whole new thing with RTD2. And so you can relax and just go, this is just another episode. This is like the Invasion of Time. We know that there's another 40 years after this, so we can relax.
It'll be interesting to see if that attitude changes now that it's basically a streaming show on Disney Plus, and if we're on the edge of our seat as much, because we won't have the same conversations we have about rate. I mean, they'll still have it on broadcast in the UK, of course, but that won't be really how the show overall success is measured. We could go on and on about this, honestly, but Dave, before we go, I just got one more question for you. Part of the consequences of the move to Disney Plus was that it's actually no longer going to be on ABC, as I understand it. So,
yeah,
I guess wondering, as an Australian, how do you feel about that? That it's just now no longer the same home it's always been in, and now you're gonna. I assume you probably already subscribed to Disney Plus, but you're going to have to subscribe to a streaming service to see this thing.
Yeah, it's something I've got very mixed thoughts about. There's certainly a very sentimental part of me that will be sad that after 60 years of the ABC broadcasting Doctor Who, they're no longer broadcasting Doctor Who. And the ABC has had good periods with the show where they've really looked after it, and others where they sort of threw it in a dark corner and were been embarrassed about it in the way a number of networks sort of were in various different times. But it's usually been pretty good, and it's always shown the show. Do I personally care that much? Well, no, because as you say, I'm a Star Wars fan, I'm a Marvel fan, I've been watching Doogie Howser. So, there's plenty on Disney Plus for me to watch. So I do have an annual subscription to Disney Plus. I'm not out of pocket. Are there going to be kids out there who might have flicked onto the ABC and seen the new Doctor Who and now won't? I think that is a risk, and that would be a shame. But if this is the way that television is going, and particularly expensive television, if this is the price you have to pay to finance a show, well, I'm certainly willing to pay that price.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense that you'd have a mixed outlook there. Awesome, guys. We could go on and on and on and talk more about the nature and of fandom and Doctor Who, but the podcast has demands. And sorry, listeners, I didn't say this a little earlier. If you want to fast forward at this point anyway to our commentary on The Doctor's Wife, there will be a prominent note in the show notes for those that didn't realize that already, and you can actually just check the time code, go fast forward to that point where we begin TLDW on The Doctor's Wife, and you can just go zip right over there. So otherwise, we're going to, for everyone else, enter the pull to open feedback loop. Listeners, hey, if you enjoy Pull to Open, our commentaries on Doctor Who episodes, of course, our TikTok channel with so many videos about the show, our TLDWs, where we summarize episodes while trying not to pee our pants. We'd like to ask you right now to please leave a review or rating in whatever podcast app you may be listening in. So reviews really do help the show, and we'd love to sometimes read your review out on the air. Even better, please share the podcast with a friend. You must know a Doctor Who friend, someone who's at least dabbled in the show. Please share the podcast with them if you enjoy it. And if you're one of our really enthusiastic fans, we'd love it if you would drop a review with an emoji title, an episode title in emoji form in it. That's like our favorite thing to get and talk about on the show in a little segment we'd like to call something, but we can't because I'd probably a bunch of emojis. It's probably head exploding emojis all together.
How
with
about just
blue box emojis and two hearts emojis, etc.
We could just call it the Whomoji game. How about that?
Oh, boom. The Whomoji.
Yeah.
What you've been keeping that to yourself for like months or something? Like, what's going on? You just came up with that?
I've been waiting to send you my invoice, Pete. It's now in the mail. So
it's great. I'm just watching this genius just happen live in front of me.
That's right. This is what happens when you're 2 cups of coffee in.
Earned your keep for the week there, Chris. You got an extra no prize. Okay.
All right.
We have more emoji titles in this challenge, this brain teaser challenge. Normally it's me giving Chris a run for his money on these, but now since we have a guest, you're both technically contestants. So whoever guesses it first will win this emoji challenge. Guys, are you ready?
Fingers on Sonics.
Okay. I didn't hear. I think I've got a yes in there. So yeah. So I'm just gonna go for it, guys. Okay. Here we go. Here's the title is 3 emojis. First emoji, a bell. Second emoji, a spoon. Third emoji, it's like a signal, like 5 bars that are growing along the thing. So it's like a signal thing. There it is. Go, shout out your title.
Is it Bells of St. John? Is that too obvious?
It's Bells of St. John!
Wow.
It is. Nicely done. Chris, you've been embarrassed by our guest. Taking away that invoice.
Fabulous. I'm so glad that you got it so quickly that I didn't even have to embarrass myself by floundering around.
I'm not sure what the spoon is about. I get the bell and I get the Wi-Fi signal. I don't know the spoon, but...
The spoon heads.
Oh,
remember the spoon heads?
Okay.
Oh, the spoon heads. Yeah, they really struck a chord, obviously. Yeah, I vaguely remember those things. Yes, okay.
Well,
congratulations, Dave,
on winning this week's Emoji Challenge. Was that... did I get that right, Chris? I actually almost forgot the name already.
Humoji, yeah, the Humoji game. Yes, the Humoji embarrassment.
Come back next week as our reigning champion. No.
No, please do, so I don't have to do it.
We'll call you in for the 5-minute thing. Yeah, it'll be great. All right, guys. That's how it goes. You too can have your emoji title read out on the show and brain teased with Chris or whatever guests we have. Just go ahead, leave them in the podcast app that you're listening to us in. Usually it's the Apple Podcast app, and that'll happen. Otherwise, you can shout them to us on Twitter. We're at Pull2Open63 on Twitter, or go ahead and just leave it in a comment on wherever you find us on the socials. Speaking of various places to find us, hey guys, if you're listening on Spotify, there are even more ways to interact with the show now. Not only can you rate the show on your mobile app, so you can give the show a star rating, but every week, Chris and I give our own Pull to Open rating on the story we talk about, whether it's a Viscount Banger, a Dalek, an Ogron, a Professor Hater. The explanations for those, if you're not familiar, will come at the end of the show. But you too can give your rating for the particular Doctor Who story we're talking about. So just go to that story in that particular Pull to Open episode in your app, and you can tell us what you thought of it through the poll function. And we will read it out on the show. And right now, we can read some results from one of our most recent episodes. Which was, what was the one 2 episodes ago now?
Drum roll, please. The Smugglers. Yeah,
Sorry,
so forgettable that we even forget that we went there.
Beat up. I should have had it ready. But the Smugglers had some people voting on it.
Yeah.
And, well, as you know, I gave it an Ogron, which is not our greatest rating. You gave it a hater, am I right?
Yes, after our Professor Hater upgrade, when we made it clear that a bad episode where you learn something is better than a bad episode.
Yeah. So I think, and Dave, you thought we were hard on it. Well, your perspective has prevailed among the fans. The number one rating on the Smugglers was a Dalek, which is what we have for a good episode of Doctor Who. So boom.
Fabulous. Did we get any Viscount bangers?
We did not. No one thought it was a Viscount banger. But it's overwhelmingly a Dalek. I'm all right. I said in the podcast I probably wouldn't revisit this when it's animated. I think the fans are persuading me. Yes, once the animated episode comes out, maybe I'll change my perspective on this.
It's a Dalek with an eye patch and a parrot on one of its balls.
One of its balls. Hey
now. I'm just going to leave that where it sits and not touch it. All right.
Yeah, don't never touch a Dalek's balls. Okay.
Oh,
guys,
we went there.
There are other places you can, of course, find Pull to Open, and one of them is YouTube. And we are at youtube.com/Pull to Open. It's a great place to also leave an emoji title or a comment. Plus, you get to see all these fun Easter eggs we have in the background. And even if you subscribe to us on a podcast app, It really does help the show if you'd also just subscribe on YouTube. You can even hit a little notification icon. That's the bell, and you will be always informed whenever we have new content. I already mentioned TikTok. We're at Pull to Open on TikTok. It's our most active social network. We try to post videos almost every day. So please follow us there if you don't already. And we're also on the Instagrams and Facebook now at Pull to Open 60.
Whoa. We just don't know when to stop. Downloading social networks from the future.
Oh, my. All right, guys. I think it's time.
It's time. You'll notice I've been quiet through all of this as I'm trying to prepare for this next segment.
The next segment, of course, we to call TLDW, Too Long Didn't Watch, Too Long Doctor Who, and
Too Long Doctor's Wife.
Oh, indeed.
This week.
You're on fire, man. Wow.
I wouldn't say that until the next minute has happened. We'll see.
That's right.
We'll see.
Well, TLDW, one of us will summarize the entire plot of the Doctor Who story we are about to talk about in record time, and we allot 60 seconds for every new Who episode, which this, of course, is being from Series 6, one of Matt Smith's seasons. And the person to do that summarizing is, of course, Christopher Taylor. Are you ready,
yes,
sir?
Never. No, I will never be ready to summarize The Doctor's Wife in 1 minute. Yes, I would like my wife to step in on this. No, I can do this.
Not on TLDW. It's all you, sir.
All
right. You ready?
Okay, a minute to win it.
Here comes the official Pull to Open summary of The Doctor's Wife in 3, 2, 1, go.
So in a junkyard and an asteroid and in another universe, there's a group of 4 people who are all bits and pieces, uncle, auntie, nephew who's nude, and a woman named Idris who's been taken over by the spirit of an approaching TARDIS, and she basically has the soul of the TARDIS. It's the Doctor's TARDIS because Amy and Rory have been alerted to a Time Lord distress signal that brings them to the asteroid. The asteroid is actually run by a creature named House that is basically taking bits of Time Lords and bits of TARDISes and it's all a big old junkyard of Time Lords and TARDISes and bodies, and it takes over the TARDIS and takes Amy and Rory away, and they get all stuck in all sorts of corridors and nightmares and stuff, but the TARDIS is able to communicate with them and gets them to go to the one of the backup control rooms, the previous control room, and they go there, and meanwhile the Doctor and the TARDIS argue a lot, and they rebuild a TARDIS and from the junkyard, and they follow House in his TARDIS. And they defeat them simply by arriving. So, yeah, and that's it. And Idris dies.
Got him about
see what I mean?
6. Yeah,
it's so yeah. To get it, maybe I shouldn't have. If I'd not mentioned. Yeah, this explanation is definitely big on the inside. If I just not paused to mention that nephew was nude, maybe I could have squeezed that one. I don't know. Was there anything major I missed out?
No, nothing. I don't think necessarily anything major that you missed. I would have definitely shaved off a little bit of the stage setting, which went on about 25 seconds or so before you actually started talking about the story.
Yeah,
that's
it's so hard.
It's always hard. That's the story.
Okay.
What a story, though.
What a story, and what a place to go to after the invasion of time, after, Pete saying he wanted a TARDIS heavy episode. It does not get more TARDIS heavy, certainly conceptually speaking, than The Doctor's Wife. And I mean, the first thing to say about this, to my mind, is that hats off to Neil Gaiman for so many things. But first of all, I think foremost of all, basically changing all of Doctor Who canon. Like the entire history of the show with a few sentences that just give you a different perspective on everything. Right? I always took you where you needed to go.
Yeah.
And I stole a Time Lord and I ran away because I wanted to see the universe.
Well, I think you're dead on in that I wouldn't necessarily say changing, because that sort of implies a little bit almost like what Chris Chibnall was trying to do with the Timeless Child. That's changing canon, whereas this is kind of, I would argue, enhancing it. It's maybe altering a couple of things slightly, but they all make sense. It all is like they all hit right. All those lines that you're talking about.
I have to jump in if this is where we're going to jump in. Okay, that's great. I'm more of the view that it's changing, because I think that it does change the way you interpret some of those particularly early years of the show. Part of the shtick and part of the concept of the show, really for the first 10 years, certainly for the Hartnell and Troughton years, is this idea the Doctor cannot control the TARDIS, and therefore his adventures are totally and utterly random. He's just a wanderer in a box. And this is now saying that maybe those adventures weren't random and there was some sort of plan to it, albeit it was the TARDIS's plan. So I think that if you want to dive down into that concept, it could be seen as a very fundamental shift in the nature of the show.
Yeah, it really does, because and they do emphasize it at the end with the handle going down on its own, right? That's I think one thing I should put a capstone on my unsuccessful TLDW by saying it ends with the TARDIS not taking to the Eye of Orion. Basically, it's where the Doctor thinks they're going, which is a nice 5 Doctor showdown.
It does give credence to the fan theory about season 5, the Base Under Siege season, which is that the TARDIS really, really doesn't like Victoria and therefore keeps landing in places about to be attacked by monsters with no escape, hoping that she's going to get killed. So.
Yeah, it was pretty hard on Victoria.
Yeah, I mean, so one sort of interesting thing that results as a result of this shift in perspective. This was the Doctor's only chance to talk to the TARDIS and ask questions. And for me, I would just be kicking myself for the rest of time and space, kind of thinking of all the questions I should have asked her, right? Like, just little things like, did you just not like some of my companions? Why did you do that thing with Jack Harkness when he jumped on? Like, was he really that bad that you had to run away to the end of time? And
did it hurt when I jettisoned the Zero Room?
Yeah, I mean, does it hurt when I jettison rooms? By the way, the swimming pool, another great reason to come here from Invasion Time. The swimming pool is a casualty, is jettisoned in this episode. But listen, like so many questions like that.
I think you're right. It does sort of alter the perspective of that, and it's not random. But I kind of see it like, again, I think you're not wrong. It just, because it hits right, it doesn't like shock you and like, oh my God, like it's more like it's giving an in-show reason for the device of like the Doctor's always landing in trouble. Well, why would that be, right? And as an analogy, I would toss out Quantum Leap, which does it a little more clumsily in that they sort of acknowledge that there's a God in a sense in Quantum Leap, and someone must be directing Sam, because otherwise why else would he be landing in people and needing to put things right that once went wrong? There's no other real reason for it. Here, I think you can do this as sort of an in-show reason for that either if we didn't suspect already, it sort of just, it serves up the structure of the show in a slightly different way that makes you like, oh yeah, that makes total sense,
Yeah, and sorry, Dave, you go first, but and then I'll make another.
Well,
point.
I was just going to say, I think the other reason why it doesn't feel quite as earth-shattering as it potentially could is because of the nature of the whole episode, and maybe in a moment we can sort of pull back to the episode. But the episode is a very unusual piece of Who, where we literally go to another universe or outside the universe to kind of play around conceptually with things, and then we come back. And so you can almost kind of look at it as this side journey where we're allowed to play around a little bit because it's kind of outside of continuity in some ways.
Right. If you do want to eject this from your canon, you kind of can. Right. If for some reason you didn't like this episode, you can say, oh, it's just at the junkyard at the end of the universe. It's, different rules applied there, and and it's all done. We can kind of forget about it. But what I was going to say I feel like the randomizer is always taking us where we need to go. And Dave, since you're also a Star Wars fan and a Disney Plus subscriber, you may also be working your way through The Mandalorian right now and
Yes.
finding the way that show kind of seems to almost have been jettisoned itself for a desperate explanation to sort of tie bits of canon together. And if you've had that experience as well, but it does seem to be increasingly focused on doing that, right? But that is so torturous. You know, you're going to get into trouble doing that, right? In terms of just constantly trying to change your stories and make explanations. Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is such a deft touch.
When you've got continuities as massive as Star Wars is and as massive as Doctor Who is, trying to make it all work is just an impossible feat. So it's good that Gaiman, I don't feel like he's trying to make it work in the way that, as you say, like the Mandalorian, you can feel the writers going, we're going to make the recent batch of movies good again, and therefore we're going to fix all the problems that fans don't like about them via our TV shows, which does sound like, it is sometimes as tedious as that sentence was. Whereas this one isn't that. It's just Gaiman going, I'm going to throw a conceptual idea out there. Take it, leave it, it doesn't matter. But hey, let's just play around with this as a thought experiment.
And I
love that it did start with Neil Gaiman, you know, when he's talked about this, he's explained that it started with just that conversation, just that, the what if the Doctor and the TARDIS could talk. And immediately, of course, you'd have, within minutes of that conversation starting, the Doctor would have to say, you're not very reliable. You know, I've a bone to pick with you about some of our navigation. You know, so just it ineluctably leads to the story, right? So it's just a wonderful use of the imagination.
Yeah, there was just so much to mine here, I feel like there's been certainly TARDIS-centric episodes before, but when you have someone like Neil Gaiman working for Stephen Moffat, both of these super fans, and just sort of really getting the show, which I think is what really separates this, and sort of knowing when to stop in some ways. And there's at least one moment where they didn't know when to stop, and they went it was a little too much. I'll get to it later, but this episode, like, really, beyond just the TARDIS stuff, mines so much in Doctor Who mythology. There's just so many callbacks, and they all kind of work and make sense.
Right, the cube.
Some of them. The cubes was like the first thing, so it's like I think it's almost the very first scene where he gets the little TARDIS mail in the cube. And I gotta confess, I'm actually embarrassed to say this. Until I listened to the commentary in preparation for this podcast, I did not put it together that the cubes in this episode are the same thing as the cube that the second Doctor puts together at the end of the War Games. And now I'm just much more appreciative of that whole thing. It's like, oh yes, like this is a thing we've seen before. Now we've seen it again. I wish we'd seen it more, either in classic series or even after this episode. I think they're just so cool. I like how Time Lord technology just occasionally gets, physical and iconic. And this is just a great example of that. And you get the little telepathic stuff. It's used to great effect here as a motivator for the Doctor. All the voices and the little Corsair snake, the Roboros snake, all that is awesome. But that's just one of many things, right? Like the TARDIS going sort of out of time and space. That's happened before. We've seen that. The Doctor says, I've rebuilt the TARDIS before, and you could probably pick your episode. The one that I thought of immediately was Frontios. Obviously, we mentioned the swimming pool. Big in the first scene in the Invasion of Time, mentioned in the 11th Hour. There's a million callbacks to the 11th Hour here, where he talks about, I love the line where he's like, I'm a madman with a box without a box. Like he's just playing off not just the mythology of Doctor Who and the TARDIS, but Matt Smith's Doctor in such a clever way. Now, I'm going to stop talking in a second, but the one thing I'm going to flip here, I've been praising, and we're all praising this episode. I think it's very widely thought of as a very fine episode, a very satisfying episode for fans. The one thing that I will, and I'm hesitant to even slam this episode at all because I like it so much, but it is very self-referential and self-indulgent with regard to the show, and that is the one strike I have against it, where it's ultimately this exercise in fan service, a brilliant exercise in fan service, but it's not really about much, which leads to relatively, even though the stakes are kind of high in this, they feel low, and the episode just kind of feels forgotten about really, really quickly after it. In other words, I like it so much, I wish it had more reverberations either beyond the show itself and beyond its own episode in the way, say, The Day the Doctor does, which I think is defensively like, if not the best episode, one of the best episodes of Doctor Who, which really resonates with you. So I've talked for a while. I want to leave you guys with that. I want to hear your thoughts on what that perspective on the Doctor's wife and hear what you have to say.
Look, I'm really glad that you said that, because I find describing this episode a very difficult thing to do. I don't think I'm quite as enamored of it as you both are. I don't think that it's a terrific episode. I wouldn't say it's an episode that I love. I would say that it's an episode I very much respect. And there's a lot here that I really admire. And there's a lot here that I appreciate. And there are a lot of little thought bubbles in there that having watched it, I've gone back and really turned over in the mind and appreciated the conceptions of what's going on in there. So I really respect and admire this episode in many ways. But there were a number of points where I wasn't hating it, but neither was I enjoying it. I was sort of like, okay, this is quite a... This is filler. There's lots of filler in between the conceptual joys, and I think that makes it a very...
What's an example of the filler?
Look, Rory and Amy being stuck in the Blake 7 corridors for half an hour. Like,
yeah, agreed.
there were some nice ideas in there, and it's good, but Rory, Arthur DeVille, always gives a fantastic performance, so it's nice to see some of those, but I was watching a lot of those sort of things, and even the stuff with the Doctor building the TARDIS. I'm like, okay, I've got the conceptual idea of this. We'll talk more about whether that works or not later. But it did sort of feel like, well, there's not a lot actually happening in this episode in terms of plot.
Wow. Okay. I have very, very different opinions to all of that. So let me take it one by one. First of all, Pete, I think I think this episode is ill served by it being in the middle of season 6. Now, I love season 6, but it is a very specific story, and this doesn't necessarily fit. And it sort of feels like it should fit. And of course, it's the River season, so we're all thinking Doctor's wife, River. It's a little bit of a confusion. We all know, I think, that it was written for Tennant's Doctor originally. So it was, and then it was going to be in season 5, and then there wasn't quite enough room for it, so it ended up in season 6. Now, I still think it works, but I think, Pete, to your point about it not having more reverberations, I think it was hard to, given all of the stuff that's about to, like the Ganger stuff that's about to happen, right? It's weirdly bookended.
In this episode, actually.
Yes, I didn't really want to get into that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It is unfortunate that, looking back on it, you see that that's not actually Amy at all.
Well, she's being driven by Amy, so it's technically
right. Right, but wouldn't the TARDIS have known that? Like, that might be a more important thing to...
The TARDIS doesn't know everything.
Can I just agree from the opposite point of view? I think it is equally not well served from being in Series 6. The reason that I feel that way is that Season 6 is the season of Doctor Who across 60 years I disliked the most. And we're about to hit after this episode... We're about to hit after this episode the 4 episodes of Doctor Who that I absolutely despise, and that at the time made me stop watching the show for 6 months. So
we got to have you back, man.
Yeah. So every time I say to people, I really dislike season 6. They're like, "Look, we get it. It's a thing. Some love it, some hate it. That's okay. But you've got to go back and watch The Doctor's Wife and The God Complex, because they're the ones that people say, even if you don't like, these are very different standalones that you need to give credit to." So I'm just saying, I agree with you. It's very out of tune with season 6. Now, whether that's a positive or a negative or just a thing, I think is very interesting. But yeah, I agree with the point.
Yeah, interestingly, two of the random episodes we've been to, The God Complex and The Doctor's Wife, and also Closing Time, which is sort of the other real standalone of season 6. It is interesting that our randomizer has taken us here.
Avoiding the rest of it.
But yeah, just to continue the point. Yeah, it's certainly being very, very Dave friendly.
It turns out I'm the Black Guardian all along.
Huzzah! Yeah, so reach out a screen, bring a crow to stick on your head. Yes, no, I think is it filler? I mean, yeah, the point is definitely well taken, but also I like it's. I mean, anything is filler, really. If you break it down enough, right? Yeah, but I think like I feel like the almost people, the Uncle and Auntie and the sort of Frankensteinishness is very interesting. Like I'm interested in these people. I'm interested in these characters. I'm interested in House, not just because he's played by Michael Sheen, who, by the way, is wasted in Doctor Who for just being a voice. It's I'm in there. I'm sort of in it to win it. I'm interested in the characters. I'm interested in the collection of control rooms. I love seeing the interior of the TARDIS. It does not seem like filler to me. And also I think you may remember, Pete, from when we did Mordrin Undead. I love aging up when companions sort of suddenly rapidly age up. That always terrifies me. It's one of those childhood behind the sofa things for me.
I'd like to get out of the way a lot of my various I really have just a few distinct slams in this episode. And again, I'm even reluctant to slam it. I don't feel I feel like it's a really great episode, but one of the things is it's sort of inconsequentialness, which I already talked about. But the other thing is we've talked about the TARDIS corridors and Amy and Rory. And the word that came to mind as I was thinking about their predicament at the end of the episode is sidelined. But they're not really sidelined because they're on screen a lot and they're doing things. There's just no real weight to it. Yes, it's creepy. Yes, there's good horror stuff and the music is great and the lighting is great. All that graffiti on the side of the TARDIS, what's happening to Rory. But then he just pops around the corner 2 seconds later and you're kind of like, WTF was that? And then,
it's the girl who waited from the opposite perspective in 2 seconds. So you're welcome.
You're fooled as a viewer into thinking maybe this is real. Maybe House has messed with time itself, and this could have happened. But then it's all just it's just a mind game. And then on top of that, it's shown, or it's at least said, that he's affecting what they can actually see. So Amy thinks the lights are off when they're not, and they're being misdirected, and he's basically showing them illusions, messing with their minds, which adds this layer of too much power to House. And at that point you're like, well, wait a minute. If they can't even know what they're seeing, touching, what they're encountering, how are they able to do anything against this guy? And it's like, it's a step too far. It's enough to have House make them run around and that he has to sort of chase them and sort of figure out what they're doing. For him to get to attach that power to him as well, it's just too much. They should just automatically lose, just from the story perspective.
Yeah,
so that whole final sequence with Amy and Rory just doesn't work. And as much as there is good stuff in it, it's a really kind of weighs down the episode a bit.
Yeah, I had the same point as well, that if House is that powerful, then you rely on the baddie or the villain doing that awful drama cliche, which is, I'm going to kill you, but not yet. And he needs to sort of be doing that a lot. And that was a shame. On the point you were making about Rory, I think coming back as a random episode, it does work. That's that sense of, oh my goodness, has Rory died? The problem is, if you watch it in order, Rory's already died and been brought back about 5 times in the last year. So it does feel, and I do remember when I did watch it, one thing I did remember from when I watched it 11, 12 years ago is that, oh, they've killed Rory again, you bastards. We're used to this now.
Oh my God, they killed Rory.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel it. Yeah, and this is definitely why we benefit on this show from watching Out of Order.
Correct.
But yeah, that whole, I mean, it is a very Moffat-y thing, isn't it? He does this, Rory does it with the Impossible Girl thing of you had this whole other, massive cosmic history that is just sort of being forgotten now, Rory, you waited for 2,000 years, and that's not apparently going to affect you in any way. for the rest of the story. Clara, you were splintered throughout time, throughout the Doctor's timeline, and you're just a normal person now.
Well, at least the 2,000-year thing gets mentioned. It's mentioned here, too, right? Like, every now and then they sort of remember it and bring something back, like Rory. I honestly can't remember everything in the run, but I think he remembers certain things he did, certain skills he got from that time. So they tried a little bit, right? And again, this episode being full of callbacks through that one in. I love all the callbacks again, but again, it's just more like it's great for fans. It sort of shows it's an episode that's a bit self-indulgent. So getting back to stuff I really like, whether it's a callback or not, I think the choice of the Ood as a villain, as a monster here, is a really good one because fans are already familiar with the Ood, what they can do, their abilities. There's something about the eyes, whether they're glowing red or green, just works. I mean, it's just this creepy thing. And because we're already familiar with their sort of telepathic brain that they carry around, that really actually helps to serve the plot a bit. Like when the Doctor repairs it in one of those early scenes and you start to hear the Time Lord voices again, it just reminds, oh yeah, that's why they're here. Oh wow, yeah, let's get going on this. Let's see the next step in the story. I thought the Ood thing was really, really good. And of course he dies. He's atomized. So boom, yes, you get to kill the monster.
Another Ood he can't save. I like that there's that quick callback there as well.
Great callback.
What do you guys think? Are you guys familiar with the alternate intro that Neil Gaiman wrote?
No.
About going to see the Beatles.
No.
Originally, that was going to be where, and he revealed this during the lockdown watch in 2020. The original script had Amy wanting to go see, and I don't think he had Rory in it at this stage, but Amy wanted to go see the Beatles at Shea Stadium in 1965, okay. and they actually go, and there's a lot of it happening backstage, and then that's when the Doctor gets the cube, and they have to rush back to the TARDIS. I kind of like
right when they're in the middle of Ticket to Ride, I'll bet.
Exactly, they're about to go see the biggest band in history, and then they have to come right back. So, and that felt like that would be a piece of filler too far for me, and perhaps a little Moffat-y stretch too far to kind of, pull in this other thing. I'm sure Gaiman was like, I've always wanted the Doctor to go to see the Beatles.
That to me sounds like Gaiman was in the middle of writing a comic, because that sounds like a perfect twist in the Doctor Who comic strip, because you just do these crazy over-the-top things. I like that sensibility that he has. Like, hey, let's try everything. And the thing is, they rolled out the red carpet for him. I mean, the reason this was held over because they just didn't have the budget to do everything, even part of what he wanted. And I got to say, watching this episode, you definitely feel like they went the extra mile. They took a little extra time. They paid more attention to every detail and every prop, and even how they were lighting the props. And they did the Blue Peter thing, right? There was a blue contest on Blue Peter for the console, so that obviously took some time and someone to manage it and figure out. So,
they did not disassemble. They did not disassemble Tennant's control room.
Right.
It just left that set for what must have been a year or more, and just told people lies about why it was that set was still up, which is fantastic. And Gaiman didn't actually even want it. He wanted a classic series control room. Which I don't know. Do you think? Exactly. Do you guys think it would have been better to see an old school control room the way we do in Day of the Doctor?
I think if it was done now, it absolutely would be an old school console room, because we know they've now got it and they love to wheel it out. So I think it would be. I think that the reaction probably is stronger being the Tennant control room, because it does feel like a little bit of more recent history and a callback that you don't expect. But I must admit, the one that I thought it was going to be the season 14 control room.
Season 14 control room.
Remind me. You mean like the old control room, the actual
the secondary control room? Yeah. Because when you said, we're going to the secondary control room, I was like,
yes.
Oh my goodness, they're going to go and put together that Woody thing. But no, it was Tennant's, and that perhaps was a deliberate piece of misdirection, because it did again mean that when I saw Tennant's, I was like, oh wow, because we're all fans of television, we're all fans of television production, and the idea that they would just have Tennant's console room taking up half a studio floor just for one scene. It seems inconceivable. So it was a big, like, wow, they did it.
Yep.
I gotta say,
Yep, that's how much of a red carpet was out for Neil Gaiman.
I liked it. I think it would have been much better served by an older console room, mostly because even though I might be in the minority here, I do feel like the first two console rooms in New Who, in my mind, blend together a little bit. Yes, they're stylistically different, but they're both big productions. The production values are similar. They're both big, vast takes on an old version, an old thing from the old series. So honestly, I don't, in terms of my audience feeling of them, they feel similar to me. When I see a Tennant episode and a Smith episode, I'm not thinking about how each one looks so different. But if I go back to old Who or classic Who, my God, that's so different, and it invokes different feelings in me. So I would have much preferred to see an old console room, though I definitely appreciate like all the behind the scenes stuff that they just left that thing lying there for like half a year or whatever, just because they needed it for this one scene.
It is interesting because normally a new showrunner, and I guess he's not a new showrunner at this stage, Moffat. He's a season in and he's a bit more confident. But normally you want to put your own stamp on it and you don't necessarily acknowledge everything the previous showrunner did. This episode is kind of surprisingly, got a lot of RTD elements in it, right? Yeah. The Ood, the old control room. It's almost as if Moffat is saying, yeah, by the way, this is still the same show that you were watching a year or two ago. Right, there is continuity. This control room is saved, and I also love the fact that the TARDIS has been downloading control rooms from the future. Doesn't know when to stop. They're just one of many, many hints that the Doctor is not actually running out of regenerations. Right, if he only thought through these things, these revelations.
Speaking of Idris, let's talk a little bit about Suranne Jones, that performance, and the choices she made. I think casting was superb. Like, she's very quirky, manic. She mirrors the Doctor's performance. She's attractive, but she's not too attractive. And honestly, she's so good with her dialogue. I mean, I feel like, even if I'm surprised you didn't watch this again for like 13 years or so, Dave, because it's like, I feel like her dialogue almost demands that you watch it twice, because you don't really get what she's talking about the first time. And you kind of want to go back and listen to it again. Like, oh, thief, I get it. And well, even though you kind of get it already, but like all this stuff with, goodbye and etc. and all these things that only really make sense when you get to the end of the episode.
And the bit where she's saying she says the river clue. She says that backwards at the beginning. Yeah, which is lovely.
She's outstanding.
She really is, and it is amazing to watch the behind the scenes stuff and realize that's not her voice at all. She's Northern. She was in Coronation Street. Her accent. But she's totally putting on the posh accent, but it just works. It really, for me, I was like, she's the TARDIS, no question. It just, and I hadn't even had an actress in mind for who might play the TARDIS as a woman. What did you think, Dave?
I certainly think that it's a fantastic performance. I agree that she and her lines are very well written, and you're right, they are worthy and meritorious of going back and looking at them again. In counterpoint to that, I don't think that the Doctor's reaction or the Doctor's approach is well written, and it does feel, particularly when the Doctor starts to go into all the sexy stuff, it does feel a bit like that sort of Moffat trope of everything has to be a relationship and everything has to be sexual and everything has to be a couple. And I'm not one of those people who attacks Moffat because he can't write women or he's a misogynist. I don't think that's remotely true, so please don't think I'm going down that rabbit hole that some fans do. But he does have this trope of sexualizing things, and I think that it's a shame that they had to do the relationship in that way, and I think that it could have been a bit better. So she's great. I don't like the Doctor's reaction to it.
I will say, I think the lines and the exchanges that work best aren't necessarily those ones that are over sexualized. I'd say the one that sticks with me the most, the one that I love, is where they run out and look at the field of dead TARDISes, and he's like, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm seeing all my sisters, and they're all dead, and they're corpses." And he's like, "Oh, hey, sorry, no." Like, and I feel like Matt Smith is like, it's comical, but you get the sensitivity that he's trying to convey.
Yeah, for sure.
But it doesn't end there. Like, honestly, that exchange just keeps delivering. And she's like, I love the way she says, you're going to build a TARDIS, and you don't care that it's impossible. And she's not frustrated. She's not accusatory or anything. She's just like, that's who you are. And actually, if you think about it, I think she's actually showing admiration from why she loves him. Like, you're just going to do this. And then, but he again, this scene keeps delivering. He goes like, I don't care that it's impossible. Rory and Amy need me. And it's like, yeah, like, and again, he underscores it. Like, this is why he's a hero. Like, he's going to do the impossible, and it's because people are relying on him, and he's gotten them into this mess. So, that to me, scene was 10 out of 10.
As for the sexy stuff, I would say I think it mostly works well here. I think the problem is everywhere else in the Moffat era, right? The fact that Amy has a moment in the previous season where she's attracted to the Doctor, and it just sort of, it's. But here it feels earned, and it feels like it's not just Moffat, because my mind goes back to School Reunion and Sarah Jane and Rose bonding over the fact that the Doctor's always like touching bits of the TARDIS, and you're like, do you guys want to be alone? There's always been this connection. I like that the new show kind of went there in the sense of like, well, what is the Doctor's relationship with this machine anyway? Like, is he just like the boy racer of the universe who just had to steal a hot rod or a car that he wanted to soup up? And it kind of is. I mean, first of all, the fact that she calls him thief, I'm in love with that nomenclature. The Doctor is a thief. Like, there's no getting around it. We've been watching for 60 years a show about a man who committed a crime. Like, he's an outlaw. He's an anti-hero. Like, we should not be teaching our kids to emulate this man who stole a TARDIS. And that's so fundamental to the show. And it's lovely to just sort of point that out every now and again, right?
Yes.
And I guess
the Doctor's morality is a lot greyer than a lot of fans would like it to be. That's very, very true.
Right. And it's definitely a sign of possession being 9/10 of the law. I guess possession is also 9/10 of the Shadow Proclamation or whatever. It's it's wonderful for her to say that. It's wonderful to kind of explore the fact that it is like the Doctor will always be closer to this machine than any creature, and you can kind of almost see a sad side of that, right? It's like companions will come and go, or strays as the TARDIS calls them, which is just wonderful. You keep bringing home strays. That line, one of my favorites in all of Who. And again, it changes your perspective a little bit if you want it to do so on everything that the Doctor has done. The companions are clearly not the TARDIS's choice.
Yeah, we can definitely picture Idris sort of leaning against the console with a hand on her hip and an eyebrow raised every time the Doctor walks into those doors with another person. Oh, please, can I keep her? She's an air stewardess. She's great.
Yes. Speaking of episodes where a TARDIS lands inside a TARDIS. I love that. I love the exploration of that. And it's does sexy take it too far? Yes, but maybe it also points out the sadness of, the Doctor will always be alone with this box until the end. Until the end of the show. It's in the nature of the show. He will abandon or lose or whatever all of his companions.
That's a really, really good explanation, Chris, except for the fact that literally in this episode, we're setting up the whole river thing, which is all about he's going to go get married. So I think what you said was absolutely great, but completely undermined by what we know is coming and what he's foreshadowed in this episode.
Oh, yeah, the wife that he hasn't seen again for the last... 5 seasons?
Yeah.
And we'll probably never be in it again. Yeah, the Doctor's wife will always overshadow the wife. Yeah. Well, it was actually the Tesselector, right? They'd never actually married.
Fair. So, speaking of performances, I got to say, can we get a little commotion for Matt Smith in this one? Again, he's great all the time. Like he's definitely like delivers. But in this one, I feel like it's those quieter moments where he's clearly feeling something big. Like, and the one I'm thinking of specifically is like when he has that rage when he finds the Time Lord cubes and realizes they're all dead, and then and sort of auntie and uncle are behind him, and he's just kind of like keeping it in, and he's like, "Oh, nice Time Lord distress cube collection you have here," and he's not only mad, but he's also like this hope has been ripped away from him, that sort of sadness, and he that despair, and you're just really feeling it, and he's just the kind of there. He's like, he's not crying, he's not outraged, at least not yet. And I just feel like from there, and like, from there on, he obviously all the stuff with Idris is great. Certainly the final scene when she says goodbye, you're kind of expecting it. But I feel like some of those quieter moments, particularly that one, I thought, oh wow, like top marks.
I thought that this was the last truly great Matt Smith performance because I think it is great here, and it reminded me of why when Matt Smith first hit as the Doctor, I thought he was up there as one of the best. That's not a view that I still hold now. Having seen the back half of his era, I have him quite a long way down my list. But I did watch this and saw it. That's right. I remember when he was fantastic, when he was perfect, and there was the perfect blend, as you said, of the quiet and the serious and the silly and the weird. And I think he did that really, really well here. I think that balance going on, particularly by the time you get to something like Let's Kill Hitler, which kind of just finished me off for a while, like that the balance is completely out of sync in that one. And that's what I remember of Matt Smith. But watching this back, I've gone, no, when he nailed it, he was fantastic. And this was a really pleasant reminder of that for me.
Yeah, Pete, I think you're absolutely right about that. He nails the sadness of being the last of the Time Lords, and in a way that Tennant and Eccleston did as well in their own ways. But like this is just, it's so natural the way that Matt Smith does sort of sullen and grumpy, which is not necessarily things that you normally associate with him as an actor, right? I mean, and I have to say, for the show, it's important to note that he does possibly the best line reading in all of Doctor Who of the words "pull to open," which he's just sort of grumpily saying, "Oh, pull to open. That's what's on the sign on the door. I push," and it just, it's. You think of him like madcap and spinning around and doing all the physical Doctor stuff, but you don't necessarily always remember him being sort of sad and like, I've lost my people, and or grumpy and like, my TARDIS shouldn't tell me what to do.
Which for me is his best work.
What do you guys think about whether, given that this episode was originally written for Tennant, how do you think he would have tackled this material?
Very good question, Dave. What do you think? I'm going to throw my thoughts.
I want to say, my gut instinct is to say badly, which isn't fair because Tennant's a very good actor. Would he have played into the whole Doctor's wife stuff more than Smith would have, and taken what I disliked and really turned it up to 11? I think probably, and I think that Smith's. Tennant does broody, and he does it well. Smith does broody in a really alien way, and I think that works better than the Tennant performance would have, particularly if it had been sort of end of Tennant's era stuff, like this would have been in Tennant's last season if it had been made, and that's when he was very, very big and excitable, and I think that wouldn't have been as good. It would have been different, certainly.
I think,
would put an interesting extra spin on the Time Lord victorious side of Tennant, right?
When we were talking about the sexual sort of overtones earlier, I think that they would not have landed the same way with Tennant, and I think he would have probably had something that was a little more icky, frankly, in that sense. And so, like, I like that Smith plays with it. he's playful with it, and it doesn't really go further than that. And you just let those funny lines land. Some people like them, some people don't like them. So I think there's that. I also think, given all the stuff going on with Last of the Time Lords in the Eggleston Tennant era, I don't know. It might have added more weight to it, but I feel like it might have also been a distraction, because I actually really like the line where and it speaks to the honesty of him and his companions. Well, honesty, at least on an emotional level, because he tricks them later. But when he talks about how, you want to be forgiven, right? And he's like, doesn't everyone? Like, even though at this point that sort of Time War stuff is more or less in the past. I mean, yes, they've yet to do Day in the Doctor, but End of Time was kind of a bit of a capstone on that for the RTD era. It's here. It's just kind of a nice reminder of like who he is. But I think it works here because it isn't overpowering, and we're not still kind of wondering when the Time Lords are coming back, because they already have. So yeah, I don't think it would have been as good as what I'm trying to get at. Tennant. Even though I love Tennant, I think I agree with everything you said, Dave. I think he's a great actor. He's a great doctor, and does his stuff really, really well. I think this script serves Smith better.
Eccleston, however, I would love to see with this script.
Agreed.
Ooh, that would be very interesting.
That would have been an interesting thing.
So yeah,
parallel universe, a bubble on another bubble on another bubble. It's not that. Just think of it if it makes you feel better.
So, so can I raise a point that I've been mulling over in my mind and I haven't reached a conclusion on?
Do it.
Mm-hmm.
The conceptual aspect of this episode is all about how the TARDIS is more than we expect. It's a much more personality driven. It's much more of an anthropomorphized thing. It's got a lot more control. And it really sort of takes the TARDIS conceptually to the next level. Then the Doctor is able to just build a TARDIS out of bits of scrap. And I was watching that and I'm wondering, does that reinforce the conceptual point that all you need is this spirit and a few bits of thrown together console room and you've got a TARDIS? Or does the ability to sort of Peter Cushing style just quickly wrap up a TARDIS in half an hour totally undermine the idea that this is a very mythical thing? Is it alive? Is it grown? Is it built? Well, no, you can build one in half an hour if you've got a couple of tools. How did that all land for you? Because I can't reach a conclusion.
I mean, given that it's a TARDIS junkyard, it's sort of like it's a bit of a Chekhov's gun moment. Like, you have to do something with that TARDIS junkyard. Sure. It's there right from the start. But yeah, I mean, it does definitely add, for want of a better word, the spiritual aspect of, you can't just pull these pieces together and put, slot A in knob B and follow the IKEA instructions for building a TARDIS. It won't go. You need something a little extra. And Idris has that great moment of you silly idiot, you have me. And that's the extra special sauce that's needed to make it go. That kind of worked for me. I liked the jankiness of it.
I think it might have been better served. I mean, it worked for me. I think it might have been even better served, though, with a scene that was cut for budget reasons. Anyway, what they were supposed to do is that scene that I was describing earlier, where they go out to the landscape of TARDISes. There was either at that point or a little earlier that Matt Smith the Doctor still didn't realize everything here was a TARDIS, and Idris would essentially deactivate the chameleon circuits on all of them. So all the bathtubs and dryers and everything would suddenly turn into some sort of form of a TARDIS capsule. I guess those sort of cylinders you see at Hellbent at one point. So I think if they had kept that moment, I actually would have loved to see that, because it's one of these sort of hit home, like, oh wow, like you thought you were screwed, but yet then now they have the means to do something. Moments might have been even more, just more of a feeling of that this is what's going to happen, how they're going to do something. So I don't know, but it was, speaking of the TARDIS thing, yeah, I think it works. It's building a TARDIS in a few seconds. I mean, if you go all the way back to Inferno, right? And this is certainly a thing of the classic series where the TARDIS was more of a machine than a being. And I think this episode, yes, tries to have it both ways, or at least tries to reconcile those two views of the TARDIS. And within the confines of a 48-minute script or whatever it is, I think it did a decent job. So I didn't feel like that undermined it.
And let me add, I certainly don't think that it undermines it. And I actually don't think that it needs to have a conclusion, because I think that the nature of Gaiman's script is that it sometimes just throws stuff at you and says, think about this. And it doesn't actually have an answer.
Yeah, that does bring up one of the billion questions that the Doctor would have wanted to ask the TARDIS. It's what the hell was going on when I was trapped on Earth and I took the console out and you threw me into a fascist parallel universe? What was that about?
So, Chris, it's all I can do right now to resist that perfect segue to the 4 questions, but I have one more thing to say before we go.
Okay, hold your segue. Hold your segue. I want to hear it.
I teased it earlier. So there is one line in this. There's a lot of great lines in this, actually, that are awesome. But there's one line to me that sticks out like a sore thumb, and I want to get your guys' take on it. And it is the line toward the end, where it's, "Fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords." And the Doctor retorts, "Fear me, I killed all of them." And it's awesome. It's a great line. The problem I have is it just feels like they wrote the line and they couldn't find a place for it. It's like it's just said, like that scene works 100% just as well without it. And it's like they both suddenly just sort of stop the scene to stick their chests out and pound them, for a second. And I feel like it doesn't work. And honestly, to me, this should have been, in my mind, a kill your darlings moment. Like, it's really, really good, but it's like, no, save that for something else, because it just sort of stops the scene. You're clearly just saying the line to say the line.
My big problem with it is that you're right. In isolation, I see why it's a cool line, but the moment you think even a little bit about it, it's the Doctor kind of playing one-upmanship on the fact that he's a genocidal mass murderer, and that's not a cool thing.
Yes, I am a thief, and I would like to take the billions of children I've killed into consideration. Yeah, it is. It's another one of those things of like, not only was the Doctor a criminal in the classic series, now we've really upped his criminality. But of course, it's all good now. We're all good. No,
clearly.
He's all good. No children died. It was bubble universe. And by the way, speaking of connections with Day of the Doctor, doesn't it seem like the moment is a bit Idris-ish? Like maybe Moffat may have taken a concept or two from Idris, creating the moment. They're sort of seeing forward and backwards at the same time. All of that, right? It suddenly seems a little less original once you watch this. But great artists steal.
Even from themselves.
Well, or from their new buddies, Neil Gaiman.
As Terrence Dix always used to say, all you need is a good idea. It doesn't have to be yours.
Perfect.
Nice.
Perfect.
With that, I will now do no segue whatsoever to our questions. They are the 4 questions to Doomsday. First question: why did the randomizer take us here? Chris, what do you think?
Well, you did it. You did it, sir. You stood at the controls of our randomizer and you said, give us a TARDIS heavy episode. And it does not get TARDIS heavier, as I was saying, but conceptually speaking, as well as physical location. We had that discussion over the TARDIS interior invasion of time. It is specifically, if you go and watch the Doctor Who Confidential, like they pull that. They have Neil Gaiman talking about his disappointment at the invasion of time,
right,
and how he really wanted to see more TARDIS interior. Not that this necessarily follows that, but of course he's got an excuse that House isn't going to want to let them roam and go find the wardrobe or the Zero Room or whatever.
You definitely get the sense he's more Davison era TARDIS than either Baker or even later Smith, right? Because then they did, after this, Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, which is kind of a totally different take. But if you look at Gaiman's TARDIS here, it's got corridors and they're all kind of similar, and they got roundels, and
love the round
very
things.
Castrovalva.
It's very Logopolis Castrovalva. The whole thing is Logopolis Castrovalva, very, very much.
Yep. Yeah, with the TARDIS appearing inside the TARDIS. Just a thing I will never not enjoy about a Doctor Who episode when a TARDIS lands inside a TARDIS. And the connection, the ultimate connection with the randomizer's drawing of the swimming pool. We're so much closer to a TARDIS swimming pool bingo. All we need now is 11th hour. And there are a few other references. Journey to the Center of TARDIS, obviously.
I gotta say, we'll get there when we get there.
Oh, yeah.
Why was Mel so obsessed with the swimming pool in Paradise Towers if there was one in the TARDIS? It's like, maybe it's just a better one, or maybe there's a crack in it. Hadn't been repaired since K9 had a problem with it. I don't know.
Yes, the last Doctor dropped his carrot juice in there, and it just looked too unappealing.
Little digression there. So my view on the randomizer here. There's obviously, it's totally listening to me now. I'm in total command of the randomizer, or at least in tune with it. But
it's taking you where you need to go.
There's a great line. I alluded to many great lines earlier. One of them is Amy's line where she says, Rory says to him, he's a Time Lord. And she goes, it's just what they're called. It doesn't mean he actually knows what he's doing. Awesome line. It's actually a perfect line in my view. Especially if you look at Invasion of Time, right? Because the Time Lords are so feckless, hapless, inept. They seem to be like they're kind of in permanent disarray whenever their society is plucked out a little bit. And, the Doctor's always flying by the seat of his pants. So it's to me that this is sort of the big encapsulation of that, because also hundreds of Time Lords have been killed by this house person. And either they were all killed during the Time Lord, or no one noticed. People just
during the Time War,
not coming back. So, it's just getting that, exclamation point on Time Lord ineptitude, including the Doctor to some extent. So that's my take.
It certainly gives you extra sympathy for the Time Lords, of which I had none after the Invasion of Time. But if so many of them have been butchered in this Frankenstein-like fashion, then and you hear their distress cries in the cubes, then you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is why the Time Lords were so much about don't interfere, don't let's just stick to our home planet and talk about pointless experiments. While putting on our different colored robes for the latest ceremony.
Robes feature a lot in Time Lord stories, and so much that you feel like evil people want to wear robes. No, I'm not. My segues are all out, man. Because
I felt the strain.
Yeah, I broke it. In fact, because the next question is,
do you want me to answer that question first?
Had succeeded. Oh, which? The randomizer?
The randomizer one.
Oh yeah, if you've got connections, bring it.
No, absolutely. Why did the randomizer bring us?
Well, I'm going to take a very personal reason for why the randomizer would bring me here, and I intimated it to you earlier on that this is an era of the show that I don't like. Now, I don't like not liking an era of the show. I don't take joy from the fact that this era of the show doesn't work for me. And people have, as I said, repeatedly said, go back and give it a second chance, particularly The Doctor's Wife, The God Complex. And I've always had it on the to-do list. I need to go back and do that, but there's always other Doctor Who to watch. There's Doctor Who that I'm more excited to watch. So the randomizers forced me to do it, and I'm phenomenally glad that it did, because I'm not saying that I'm now completely converted. I'm not saying I now love this era, but I have respected and enjoyed aspects of this episode. I've been reminded about some of the things I don't like. I find Amy a very toxic companion, and I was reminded of that in this episode. So it did reinforce some things, but
I'd like to unpack
I probably wouldn't have come back and enjoyed this as much as I did had the randomizer not forced me to.
Nice.
Well, huzzah for the randomizer. I love it. Any time this show and this randomizer can result in more people liking more of Doctor Who, I think that's a result.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that, Dave. I'm so glad that we could.
That you find Amy to be a toxic companion. Now that sounds a bit like an evil plot, but before we do that, I think we need to consider what if the evil plot had succeeded.
All right. So this question presumes that if House had been a bit more on the ball and perhaps not let a TARDIS materialize within a TARDIS, with the TARDIS spirit of the TARDIS on board the TARDIS that's materializing inside the TARDIS. If House had not been distracted and if it had actually been able to do that, then here's my thought. We've got 2 amazing new spin-off series shows. One starring Amy and Rory trying to rein in House as he flies around our universe with malevolent glee and just kind of living for drama all over the place, killing off any Time Lords, or in the absence of Time Lords, killing off whatever he can find, which sounds like a great spin-off. And also another with the Doctor and Sexy, as I'm sure she'd be renamed in this spin-off, visiting all of space and time and bickering endlessly. And, I'm not saying that's better than what we got in the later seasons, and it does produce some problems and some plot holes, and we haven't solved the whole Gallifrey thing, and Day of the Doctor would certainly be substantially different. But yeah, I think that's what we get. If the evil plot succeeds, doesn't necessarily kill anyone. I mean, unless you take it at the point where he's like sucking the oxygen out of the room or whatever. Right. But he doesn't seem to want to kill them. Like he's playing with them for sport. So,
until they take down the shield, and I guess you would have to assume they never get that far if the evil plot's succeeding.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but up until that point, he's playing cat and mouse.
Yeah, and he seems entertained.
I think there's a version of the evil plot succeeding where the Doctor and Amy and Rory are just body parts on a planet.
Yeah, wow. What a dark way to leave the show. Not only we've had the first companions to die, how about the first companions to be dismembered?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be interesting. And I guess if you don't like Amy, a result.
Well, it's interesting to note that the original, I'm not sure what point it was, if it was early, one of Gaiman's early drafts or something they were just talking about because of what ended up happening in Series 7, but they wanted to bring back the Great Intelligence, and House was going to be the Great Intelligence, and that was going to kick off that whole arc. For whatever, because of the way the BBC was back when scripts were done back then, they didn't really have the rights. They had to secure them. They didn't do it. So House ended up being this one-off evil thing, which works really well. And Michael Sheen's great. But again, it speaks to sort of the inconsequentialness of the episode. I think, maybe I would have felt differently about some of the reverberations had they gone with the Great Intelligence. So I like that evil plot succeeding if it gets out and you have a bit of almost like a mini season where it's in charge of the TARDIS, and this is something you could see almost the novels or even Big Finish doing for a bit, like a small box set where it's like evil TARDIS and patchwork people doing bad things. It's almost like the evil version of the Doctor, like it's almost like the Master, but whatever. That could kind of work. The problem is then it's like, who could you have is everyone else is the Doctor, Amy and Rory dead? Is there a version of this where they could survive? And then there's an alternate Series 6, which actually is really, really cool. I wouldn't mind that evil plot succeeding if that's the case.
Yeah. We've never had that, right? Now, and that's definitely something other shows have done. Like Red Dwarf did it for many seasons. They were tracking Red Dwarf itself, right?
Yeah.
You could definitely have that. You could definitely have a whole season where the Doctor is pursuing the TARDIS that has been stolen from the thief.
And I definitely got almost Arc of Infinity vibes from House towards the end, in that whilst House, like Omega, has done evil things to get out and to escape, once House is in charge of a TARDIS and back in the main universe, is it going to do evilly things, or is it just going to be very happy it can now do that and wander the universe just checking stuff out? I don't know.
I like that. Well, I like that bit. That's really interesting. I didn't think of that until you just said it, but I love that idea in Arc of Infinity. And again, for the podcast, we'll get there when we get there, but it seems that once he's been freed and he can actually interact and sort of enjoy things again, you start to feel like the evil was a symptom of his isolation, and that he's might be rehabilitatable, right? They don't really get a sense of that here. You never have a moment where House is like, huh, unless you count him actually letting Amy and Rory run around and entertain him. Of course, he does evil things to them, so probably not. But that could have been a way, a bit of a through line for something that would have gone beyond just this episode. I love that, Dave.
Yeah, and certainly there wasn't, that I picked up, any sense of, now that House is free, its next item on its evil plan is to go and oppress this people or go and destroy this thing. We don't actually know what House wanted to do once it got free, and it may have been perfectly content to just be free.
Yeah, and you could argue that maybe, looking at this from another perspective, the evil plot did succeed. The evil plot was the spirit of the TARDIS killing this interloper, just annihilating House, and maybe House was the only one of his kind, and it's actually a genocide.
Wow.
And Idris, stone cold killer.
Wow, I like that.
No one tell the Shadow Proclamation. All right, moving on to the third question.
Pete, we got a segue. We got a segue to the third question.
Do we?
Which is, if House had been the great intelligence, then there would have been no need for anyone to jump into the Doctor's timeline.
And we would not be asking, where is the Clara Splinter? As everyone knows, Clara Oswald splintered in time at the end of The Name of the Doctor. Throughout the Doctor's timeline, she is somewhere in every single story of Doctor Who doing something, and we like to figure that out, even though she's not on screen in most of them. So where is the Clara Splinter here? This is a tough one because there aren't that many spots where she could fill.
I think she locks
a lot
the
of the
door.
times we... Not bad.
Interesting. Yeah, because we don't get any... we think that that's the Doctor locking them in for their own safety, right? But it's not... It's never actually specified. Interesting. Yeah, I had a different take, which is that she's actually doing this one for herself. She's in the TARDIS junkyard, learning how these machines work, with foreknowledge of the fact that she and me are going to go steal one at the end of Hellbent, and she needs a little bit of TARDIS practice, and maybe having one of her previous splinters be a TARDIS expert will help her there. So she the Impossible Girl's just taking this one for herself, for her own timeline.
Not bad.
She deserves a vacation.
Not bad. I'm going to totally admit I completely punted this one because most of this episode occurs in another universe, and that's totally okay for even the Impossible Girl can't get through, leave space time. So
maybe she's the alternate Rory. She just ages so much. She actually does age through 2,000 years and ends up looking like Rory. And that would actually explain why his hands look so young.
Oh, yeah. Tell me you didn't actually
continuity errors in that scene.
You just read that on a summary somewhere, right? You didn't actually notice the hand, did you?
I read that, and then I went back and I looked, and I was like, oh yeah, it's now I can't unsee it.
Yeah, now you can't unsee it. Yeah, I didn't notice it all, and now it's forever. I'm always going to be looking at the hands. Oh, those are young hands. Thanks, Doctor Who fans. All right. We have to go now, guys. We have to go to the fourth question, the final question, the only question that matters for the Doctor's wife, which is, what did we think of this episode? The Pull to Open rating system, of course, has 5 ratings. They are the Viscount Banger, which we reserve for the best of the best. The Dalek, which is for a good episode of Doctor Who. The Professor Hater, which is for a not so good episode, but at least they tried something, or at least we learned something. The Ogron, which is just for a not so good episode of Doctor Who. And then there's the rarely used Fixed Point in Time, where it is an episode we simply cannot rate for usually reasons of nostalgia, but for reasons.
Because reasons.
So what do we think?
The because reasons rating. Well, it's probably no surprise to either of you guys that this is a full-on Viscount banger for me. In fact, it's a Viscount banger that maybe is a Frankenstein's monster of other Viscount bangers that it has lured to its own asteroid and in a bubble
Nice.
universe, and has stuck them together. And there's a box somewhere with lots of Viscounts in it. And this is a solid Stone Cold classic to me. It was definitely improved by this viewing. I found I'd completely forgotten about the cold open. I'd forgotten there was a moment with it that Idris was an actual person whose mind gets vaporized. Like that's another one of these super dark Gaiman things, and it really is like to me this is the only Neil Gaiman episode of Doctor Who. And Nightmares of Silver, like I always had a problem with that because of the way that it was. Moffat insisted on squashing it from 2 episodes and down into 1. And to me, that was an absolute disservice, and probably made Neil Gaiman never want to write an episode of Doctor Who again after that experience. But this is it, and it manages to be so Gaimanish with like the costumes and everything that feels very very Gaiman like, and at once very very respectful to Doctor Who. Canon and puts a wonderful new twist on it, and perhaps in the way only a newcomer to the show can.
Nice. So I'll give my rating, and then Dave, you can have the final word. I agree with a lot of what you said, but honestly, it's for reasons I said almost at the outset, that because this episode is just so self-referential, and it doesn't really go not just self-referential to the episode, but to Doctor Who itself. And it's brilliant. It's great fan service. I laughed out loud. The emotions were, I was in tears at the end when he's saying goodbye to the TARDIS. All of that was outstanding. But ultimately, it's not really about anything other than Doctor Who. And don't get me wrong, I love me Doctor Who. We have a whole podcast around loving Doctor Who. But I need more for it to be a Viscount banger. That said, I would say it's a Dalek Emperor. I mean, it's so good. It feels great. I loved revisiting it. I've done it a couple times since it was first broadcast. I always have a great time. I sat down with my whole family this time, so both of my kids and my wife. We all really liked it, but we all sort of came to the same conclusion. That was really, really good. Not necessarily one of the best ever. So that's my review. It's a Dalek, one of the best Daleks ever, but it's a Dalek. How about you, Dave? What's your final word on this?
Look, I hope you don't think I'm cheating or just indulging myself when I do this, but I'm going to pull the rarely used fixed point in time on this one because I do think that this is a very difficult episode to rate. I think that as an intellectual exercise, it is phenomenally interesting and thought-provoking. As a piece of entertainment, I wasn't all that entertained through large parts of it. So how do I judge it, therefore? And literally, as I said, Gaiman takes us off into a little pocket universe and kind of conceptually plays around with the show, and then we come back in, and it feels like, as somebody who really grew up in the wilderness years, it feels like one of those standalone fan-written stories where you just go, look, this isn't part of continuity. I'm just going to go and play with this thing and see what you all think. And look, if I was rating Gaiman's Day of the Dead episode of Babylon 5, I would say exactly the same thing and give it exactly the same rating. He's very good at coming in, playing around with the thing off to the side, and then handing it back with you going, wow, what was that all about? So, look, I think if ever there was an episode that deserved a fixed point in time, I think it's The Doctor's Wife.
That is a great take. I love that you're using the fixed point in time in an unexpected way, too, because we usually think of it as something, I think, that, it's not a great episode. We can't really defend it, but because we have nostalgic reasons, we'd like to give it some kind of rating for that. But I love that you're using it in a different way, that this is, it's really can't be evaluated in the same way as other episodes, which I think you're very right. This is, it's kind of almost not Doctor Who. And then what you said there really resonated about it feeling like a short story or something what someone might have written for Doctor Who magazine back in the wilderness. It does. It absolutely does.
It's very, very standalone, very, very, very Doctor Who annual. I definitely agree with you on that. But yeah,
Wow.
doesn't suffer. But yes, Dave, thank you. That you will forever be the first pull to open guest to use a fixed point in time in your review. Thank you for that.
pleasure.
And I love the emergent behavior of using it in a slightly different way. We definitely live for that stuff. Given how our rating system emerged on the fly in itself, I basically invented the fixed point of time as a rating because I could not do it to Destiny of the Daleks. I could not say that was bad. That was where I jumped on. So yeah, it was just too close to my heart. But I love this use of the rating too. Thank you for that.
Pleasure.
All right, folks. It is time for us to jettison some rooms and leave this pocket universe with the Doctor's wife and figure out where we're going next. Which means it's time to activate the randomizer. The randomizer, of course, constitutes 2 parts. I have the one of the parts in front of me right now, the pull to open codex. And there is another part. Oh, sorry, I should explain what the codex is. The codex is a complete list of all the Doctor Who adventures that have been broadcast on television, every single story. And to figure out which one we're going to, we have to introduce the random element. Chris, what is that?
And the random elements that we add to the spreadsheet that is bigger on the inside, called the Codex, is called random.org, also known as the Executor. And random.org will give us a random number based not on algorithmic randomness, which is rubbish, but on atmospheric noise, on atoms bouncing around the atmosphere, whether or not that atmosphere is here or in a pocket universe, or reaching absolute zero in a pocket universe. We'd never mentioned that aspect, did we? Talk about a cold take. Anyway, atmospheric noise is what random.org uses, and Dave, I believe you graciously agreed to stand at the controls of random.org for us.
I have it open, yes.
Fantastic. So Pete will give you the number. So obviously the number we need is between 1 and Pete. What are we down to? How many stories are left in the Codex?
That would be 222.
Wow.
222. That's one for the Australian listeners.
Thank you for translating.
There was a cricket commentator in Australia who pronounced his Q's very, very well. So Australians, if you ever say to Australians 2 for 22, they know exactly what you mean. So
that's awesome.
I love it. I may even have heard that cricket commentator in my dad's interminable watching of cricket in my childhood. So it sounds very familiar. All right, so before we find the random number between 1 and 222, we like to issue challenges to the randomizer. And we know the randomizer will just take us to wherever we need to go anyway, but we like to pretend. We like the illusion of control, as the Doctor does. And so Pete, do you have any requests for DJ Randomizer?
You know, I like that we came to a Smith episode. I'm about to say I'm feeling good about it, and we haven't done a ton of Smith, to be honest. It's still one of the Doctors we've probably done the fewest episodes of. So let's give us some more Smith, more Matt Smith, please.
Do we want to venture into Dave's rage quitting zone? In season 6, that might be the next way to go. We were concerned at the increasing number of Nazi references the randomizer was throwing up, and that might take us to Let's Kill Hitler. Which, by the way, I think I had a much better experience of that side of season 6 than Dave did. Well, okay, I'm not going to ask for that. I'm not really on a good track record with the randomizer. It seems to be listening to you, not to me. I've asked for Troughton episodes. It hasn't thrown up one of those. And I asked for a really terrible, awful episode of Doctor Who last time, just to be oppositionally defiant, and it gave us this. So that does seem to be the way that we want to go here. Take us to a Doctor Who story that is probably too long for what it contains.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
I see what
us.
you did
Yeah,
there.
Dave complained about padding. Show us some real padding. Show us some sort of 8-episode, 6-7-episode thing that just doesn't deserve to be that long.
Dave, you got a challenge for the randomizer?
I think after an extremely intellectual exercise, take us to a story that is completely non-intellectual and is just incredibly fun but means absolutely nothing.
Nice.
Sometimes. I love it.
Wow. I wonder if it can fulfill all of our requests. Not really. Not a lot of padding in Matt Smith.
We'll see, though.
Necessarily, whether or not you agree with the padding. Yeah.
Well, they'll always take us where we need to go. So, guys. Oh, sorry, Dave. Got your hand on the button?
I have, yes.
I'll give you a countdown, all right? All right, here we go. Need a number between 1 and 222 in 4, 3, 2, 1.
210.
Ooh, we're really late.
Wow. It's got to be Whittaker, right?
Oh, it's Whittaker. Yes. It's the Saranga conundrum.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
okay. Not
certainly not Smith. Certainly didn't mean a lot. As I recall. Yeah, and padding is there might be some padding in this one. So I feel like the randomizer may have split the difference.
You know, I think it might have heard my earlier comment about the Ood being a good monster and it wanted to give us wanted to flip that. So that might be what this was all about.
But also, I think that Dave's recent examination of Whittaker may be influencing here.
Well,
Not
Rob did rewatch this one for our cold take, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see if you agree with his reassessment.
Yeah, we're going to have to go back and listen to the Doctor Who show, which you should also do, dear listeners.
Absolutely. Head on over. You're in a podcast app because you're listening to us, but search in that podcast app for the Doctor Who show. Give it a follow. Dave, it's been fantastic to have you here. Hope you can come back again. Maybe Rob could come next time. I don't know. We could keep it going. But anyway, thanks for listening, listener. This is a podcast. It's called Pull to Open. And what do you do with podcasts? Of course, the one you've just subscribed to, the Doctor Who show. You could subscribe to this one too. It's called Pull to Open. So please subscribe to us on whatever platform you have. Go ahead and check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Pull to Open. Follow us on all the socials, TikTok, Pull to Open, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pull to Open 63. Thank you very much, Martin West, for your music. It's rocking. And leave a review if you can.
All right. Thank you again to Dave Ketchen for joining us in the Doctor Who show. We will see you next time for the Saranga conundrum.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.